Growing up, my grandfather had a small aluminum John boat. It wasn't very long. It wasn't very wide. It was just kind of a small boat. Had a little tiller handle motor on the back. I don't remember. It was maybe 50 horsepower, maybe a little less. It wasn't anything too strong. It was just a boat. And I remember several times growing up, we'd go out early in the morning. My dad and I would go, and we'd meet my grandfather at the boat dock. And when we met him there, we'd already stopped at the bait shop. We'd have picked up some bait. Of course, we had a tackle box full of bait. But we'd always try to find another lure or get some minnows or something like that. We'd pick us up a biscuit. I like tenderloin biscuit, the place that we went. So I'd get a fried tenderloin biscuit, and I'd get something, I don't know, a yoo-hoo or something like that. And we'd pick up usually some Vienna sausages and peanut butter crackers and a couple of Cokes. We always wanted to get them with the lid on them because we didn't want to take a can. I wouldn't drink the whole can at once, so it was something we could put back in the cooler. And we would meet early in the morning. The sun's just coming up. And I remember several times being out in that boat, us getting in and putting it down into the water, and one of them going and putting the truck up and coming down and jumping in, and us pushing off, and them starting that motor up and us going across the water and looking across, and the water was just like glass. You've seen it before like that. Maybe you've gone across a bridge, or you've been on a boat yourself, or you come across and see some of the water around here, and it's just as smooth as it can be. The only thing that's making any waves in that water is us. Every once in a while, you might see a little splash of a fish here or there while you're going down the water. And a lot of times when that water was just as smooth as it could be, there was just a little bit of fog rising up off the water. Just a little bit, not a lot. Maybe just enough to kind of make it look, kind of scenic out through there. But one thing that I always remember about those moments, as peaceful as they looked, I was normally freezing cold. As peaceful as it looked, we were moving in a boat early in the morning, and it was cold. And it didn't feel like it ought to feel. Like I'm looking around me, and I'm thinking, this is the most peaceful thing I've ever seen in my life. My dad might even point out and say, look at that bird flying right across the top of the water. Things that you wouldn't normally see that you see when you're out there. And I remember thinking, this looks amazing, but I am freezing cold. When are we going to stop this boat? And really, when are we going to start fishing? Like, I'm ready to get to where we're going because, that looks great and it looks peaceful. Great, I've seen it. Now I'm ready to catch fish. Now I'm ready to get out here and fish. And the peaceful moments didn't feel like I thought they should feel. They felt different. And a lot of times in our lives, when we are at peace with God, it doesn't always feel like we think it ought to feel. You see, when I think of being at peace with God, I think of everything being okay in my life. No one's mad at me. I'm not behind on my bills. Everybody's okay health-wise. When I think about being at peace with God, I think about everything ought to be just okay. Everything ought to be fine. I ought not feel any guilt or shame about anything. I ought not have any problems that are upcoming. Everything ahead of me are things that I look forward to. But sometimes we find ourselves in our lives and we wonder, am I really at peace with God? Because it doesn't feel like that. It may be that in our lives we are completely right. I'm one of those preachers who happens to think that some of us might go to heaven. You know what I mean? Like it might be that there are people here in this room right now and your life is completely fine with God. You have obeyed the gospel. You're faithful. You are trying to do everything that you can to live your life right, and you know there are things you need to work on, but for the most part, things are good and your life is right with God. And if Jesus came back today, you'd go to heaven, but it may not feel like that. It may not feel like I'm at peace with God, because there may be problems. There may be difficulties. There may be something going on and you're wondering, is God punishing me? Is God putting me through this? There may be something going on and this peace doesn't feel like it ought to feel. Well, sometimes being at peace with God brings about difficulties in our lives, because there's two separate things that we cannot put together. I cannot say that being at peace with the world is equal to being at peace with God. I cannot judge how I am in the eyes of God based on what's going on in my world. The Bible teaches pretty clearly that those are two separate things. Friendship with God is actually enmity with the world. And friendship with the world is enmity with God. Sometimes being at peace with God doesn't feel like we think it ought to feel. In 2 Chronicles, we have the situation where the temple has been dedicated by Solomon with this amazing prayer. All the people gathered together. This temple had been intricately put together, had been pieced together from the best known pieces of elements, trees, gold, all the things that they could find. Brought in artisans to deal with this material from other countries, brought them in and put them up and paid them to make this thing look amazing. And this amazing prayer was offered. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, God responds to Solomon in his bed. He doesn't respond to Solomon in front of everybody, even though there is a response from God, but he comes to Solomon. And one of the things that he says is in verse 14, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and heal their land. What's interesting about the original language in this is not a compounding thing. First, you need to do this. Second, you need to do this. Third, you need to do this. The way the emphasis is put on this, because in Hebrew, they don't have punctuation. And so you have to read into the context and the inference, and people a whole lot smarter than I have looked at this. The idea is what he's saying here is that if the people who are called by my name will do these things, which is one act. These things that I'm telling them to do is one thing. Even though it seems like multiple things, they're the same. In the original Hebrew, there's nothing that helps us understand exactly the way that's laid out. So it's a single conditional act. It's the idea that humbling yourselves is doing these things. And so some have said that it's a correct representation of the passage is if my people who are called by my names will humble themselves by praying, seeking my face, and turning from their wicked ways, then I'll heal them. And the idea is these are things that go hand in hand. You can't say, well, I'm going to humble myself, but I'm not going to pray to God. Well, I want to pray, but I just don't like this humility thing. Well, I want to seek God's face, but I don't want to turn from my wicked ways. He's saying these are all things that need to be a part of returning to God in a way that there's peace made with God so that He can heal you. The humbling part is kind of the qualifier of this. If we humble themselves, that's their internal posture. That's the part of them that inwardly brings about the right response to God. Because, see, you could pray to God, and you could seek His face, and you could turn from your wicked ways, but you could still not be humble about it. The precursor to being at peace with God so that He can heal a person or a people is this humility, this internal posture of humility. And the truth of the matter is, humility is sometimes hard. Sometimes humility is difficult. Sometimes humility is something that we don't want to deal with. And sometimes humbling ourselves brings about some internal conflict and internal strife, and that doesn't feel very peaceful. It doesn't feel very peaceful to look at yourselves and go, here are all these things that I've been looking at all wrong, or here's some things that I've done wrong. Here's some things that I need to correct. Sometimes humbling ourselves or being humbled, sometimes that is a difficult thing. You go to Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 2. They're wandering in the wilderness. And the Bible says, and you shall remember that the Lord your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. You see, there was a group of people who were going to go into the promised land, but they came back and they said, we can't, there's no way. These people are too big. We can't do this. And God said, okay. You won't then. I'll wait till the next generation. So he puts them in the wilderness for 40 years wandering. And this is what Deuteronomy says. Moses tells them this is why he did it. It was to humble you and to test you, to see if you would do what God wanted you to do. That doesn't sound easy. Wandering around for 4 decades. That doesn't sound easy. But it was something that God did to bring about humility in them. He humbled them so that they would be humble. He wanted them to be. Sometimes humility takes time. Sometimes humility is inflicted by God. Things that are designed. Interesting enough, he said, to humble you and test you. The idea here is I'm going to do things that ought to show you my power. It ought to show you role in connection with mine. That's the humbling part. Now I'm testing to see whether or not you're going to respond to that correctly. I'm testing whether or not you're going to allow that to become a part of your personality, a part of the way you view your lives, the way you follow me and serve me. I'm going to humble you. I'm going to take you away from giving you what I was going to give you. I'm going to put you in a tough situation, and I'm going to see whether or not you're going to handle it right. Because he could have humbled them, and it might have brought about a sense of pride. It may have brought about a sense of arrogance in them, where they could have gone against God, which happened quite often. Humility is sometimes hard. Humility can be caused by God, but humility can also be self-imposed. In Ezra chapter 8 and verse 21, then I proclaimed a fast there at the river Ahava, that we might humble ourselves before our God, to seek from him the right way for us and our little ones and all our possessions. He said, we've got a decision to make. And Ezra says, so I proclaimed a fast right there beside the river so that we would humble ourselves before God, so that he might help us. Sometimes humility is internal. We decide to do it. It's a choice that we make. And even if God chooses to do things with the intention of humbling us, if we don't respond correctly, then we're not doing it internal. Humility is not an external thing. It's a viewpoint. It's the way we view our lives. And sometimes because of that, peace with God or becoming at peace with God, it doesn't feel like it ought to feel. In Psalm chapter 25 and verse 9, the humble he guides in justice, and the humble he teaches his way. When we get to a point where our hearts are humble towards God, it makes us malleable. It makes us able to be molded by God. The stiffness or the hardness of our heart stops us from being able to respond to God correctly. But when we're humble, it allows that. And then Psalm 149 and verse 4, salvation can only be granted to a humble person. So humility is important. The Bible tells us a lot about it. For the Lord takes pleasure in his people, and he will beautify the humble with salvation. The Bible tells us that God gives grace to the humble. He exalts the humble. He's drawn to the humble. God gives greatness to the humble. God lives with the humble. God revives the humble. Humility gives real friends, the proverb says. God esteems the humble. Humility leads to honor, and humility leads to faith, to truth, and to true wisdom. So humility is important. When God says, we've dedicated this temple and we're setting up a standard, He wanted to give provisions for times when they got away, when they moved away from Him, when they were disobedient. He wanted to give a provision, and He wanted the provision to be, I'm waiting on you to come back, but you're going to have to come back the right way. You can't just come back any way you want to. You've got to come back the right way. I remember one time when I was a youth minister, I had a father who called me up one day, and his son had been giving them a lot of problems. And he said to me, he said, Reed, I want you to come over here because I'm having so many problems. He was just graduated high school and was living at the house. There was drugs and there was all kinds of things. He goes, I've just decided I'm going to kick him out of the house, and I want you to come help me do that. Well, that was mistake number one on my part to ever show up. But I went over there. And I went and I sat down, and the son, when I didn't know I was there, he was upstairs in his room, and the dad called for him to come down. And he came in, and I'm not going to say his name because his actual name was the same name as somebody in this room. But anyway, he came down, and he said, hey, Reed, what's up? What are you doing here? I was like, hey, man, good to see you. The dad said, Reed's here because I've made a decision. I'm going to kick you out of the house. You're moving out. Oh, why is that, Dad? He goes, you've been causing a lot of problems. You've struck your mother. You have stolen from us. We've caught you doing drugs and drinking numerous times. You've been mischievous. You just gave them this list of stuff. And while he's talking, the son goes, Dad, can you hang on just a second? Just 1 second. I'll be right back. And he got up and he went into the kitchen and he brought an apple with a knife back and sat down and started just kind of peeling the apple with the knife and said, go ahead. And he peeled that apple. Just kept peeling that apple. Just kept peeling that apple. And his dad's talking. He's going, are you listening to me? He goes, uh-huh. Keeps peeling that apple slow as he can, trying to make one peel out of it. And then he goes, hey, Dad, real quick, how much longer is this going to take? I got somebody coming to pick me up in about 5 minutes, and I want to make sure I'm done in time. He said, do you understand what I'm telling you? And he goes, yep. Oh, I'm sorry about all that. I'm sorry about that. I'll do better. Oh, look, he's here. And the guy pulls up. He goes, he's here. I'm going to get out of here. And the dad looked at me and I went, I'm just listening. He goes, why don't you go out and tell him that you're going to need a couple more minutes? He goes, okay. So he goes out. And while he's out, the dad looks at me and he says, what should I do? And I said, you said you were going to kick him out. And he goes, you ready what he said? This is what the dad said. You're going to go, that was the problem. He goes, well, he apologized. He said he apologized. Everybody knows that he didn't mean it. There was no humility in that heart. There was no desire to fix things. We cannot go back to God like that. We cannot go to God going, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you going to let me stay? Good. This is teaching us that there has to be something internal that's committed to fixing and making better. Now, I want you to fast forward, and I want you to turn your Bibles to 2 Chronicles 33. We're going to read the majority of the chapter. Because between 250 and 300 years after the dedication of this temple, there's a king that comes along named Manasseh. Manasseh was the son of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah was a great king, had done a lot of things, had brought the people to God. But Manasseh, his son, on the other hand, did not. And he did some of the worst things that has ever been done. He did things based on his knowledge. He knew what God's commandments were, and he intentionally broke them out of disrespect for God. Chapter 33, starting in verse 1. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. But he did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. That's how the introduction to this guy is. He was awful. He was as bad as the people that God had kicked out of this land. For he rebuilt, verse 3, the high places which Hezekiah the father had broken down. He raised up altars for the Baals, and he made wooden images, and he worshiped all the hosts of heavens and served them. He also built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, in Jerusalem shall be my name forever. He's referring back to 2 Chronicles 7:14, the passage we're looking at. He says he knew that God had said that and deliberately went against it. He built altars to pagan gods in the temple of God. And he did it on purpose. And he did it to challenge God. And he did it because he didn't care. Complete disrespect for God. Verse 5, and he built altars for all the hosts of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord. Also, he caused his sons, his own sons, to pass through the fire in the valley of the son of Hinnom. He practiced soothsaying, used witchcraft and sorcery, and consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. Don't you think that would make God mad? He took his own sons and sacrificed them to pagan gods, killed his own children as sacrifice to other gods. Verse 7, he even set up a carved image, the idol which he had made in the house of God, of which God had said to David and to Solomon his son, in this house and Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. And I will not again remove the foot of Israel from the land which I have appointed for your fathers, only if they are careful to do all that I have commanded them, according to the whole law and the statutes and ordinance by the hands of Moses. So Manasseh seduced Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to do more evil than the nations whom the Lord had destroyed before the children of Israel. This guy was awful. And he didn't care. And he did it on purpose. And he led the entire nation to do these things with him. Verse 10, the Lord spoke to Manasseh and to his people, but they wouldn't listen. God went to him and said, you gotta quit this. I don't know what God said to him, but they wouldn't even listen. Therefore, the Lord brought upon them the captains of the army of the kings of Assyria, who took Manasseh with hooks, bound him with bronze fetters, and carried him off to Babylon. A hook in his nose. They may have already had some sort of ornamentation there based on the way he was worshiping. But he took a hook, a large hook, like you would put in an ox, in an animal. And they put that in his nose and attached it to a chain and led him by that hook. These bronze fetters that they bound him with treated him like an animal and treated him like a slave. God sent them to do that. Now Manasseh's got options. He was terrible. Verse 12. Now when he was in affliction, he's got options. Now when he was in affliction, he implored the Lord his God and humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers. And God said, you got what you deserved. And God said, who do you think you are? And God said, no. It's too late. Nope. You had your chance. 55 years? Should I remind you of what you did in my temple? Should I remind you what you did with your children? Should I remind you of how you led my nation away from me? Shall I remind you how you tried to erase my name? Shall I remind you of all these things that you've done? You deserve this. You got what you deserved. Sometimes being at peace with God doesn't feel like we think it ought to feel. Let's read verse 12 again. Now when he was in affliction, he implored the Lord his God and humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers and prayed to him. And he received his entreaty, heard his supplications, and brought him back to Jerusalem into the kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord was God, as if he didn't already know. He knew now. After this, verse 14, he built a wall outside the city of David on the west side of Gihon, in the valley as far as the entrance of the fish gate, and it enclosed Ophel, and he raised it to a very great height. I will protect you and your people, is what he was saying to God. Then he put military captains in all the fortified cities of Judah. He took away the foreign gods and the idols from the house of the Lord, and all the altars that had been built in the mount of the house of the Lord and in Jerusalem, and he cast them out of the city. He also repaired the altar of the Lord, sacrificed peace offerings and thanks offering on it, and commanded Judah to serve the Lord of God of Israel. The problem was, nevertheless, the people still sacrificed on high places, but to the Lord their God. And he says in verse 18, because the Chronicle writer was trying to accomplish some very specific things. He said, now you can read more about this. The rest of the acts of Manasseh, his prayer to his God, the words of the seers who spoke to him in the name of the Lord God of Israel. Indeed, they're written in the book of the kings of Israel. You can go back and read some of those things. Verse 19, also his prayer and how God received his entry and all his sin and trespass, and the sites where he built high places and set up wooden images and carved images before he was humbled. Indeed, they are written among the sayings of Hosea. Verse 20. How peaceful does this sound? So Manasseh rested with his fathers, and they buried him in his own house. I read that passage to you because this was, some estimate, 260 years after 2 Chronicles 7, where God said, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, if they will pray to me and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear, I will heal, and I will forgive them. Sometimes being at peace with God or getting to peace with God doesn't sound or feel like I think it ought to feel. So in conclusion, I want to give you just a couple quick thoughts, and I've done it this way on purpose today. First of all, choosing humility is better than being humbled. We learned that from our brother Manasseh. Choosing humility is better than being humbled. God can humble us. But if we can decide that that's going to be a part of who we are, it's much easier for us to do that. Secondly, humility will help us accomplish more. Think about what had happened if a 12-year-old Manasseh had done all these things, and as a 20-year-old, as an 18-year-old, whatever the case, he had decided to humble himself then. How much more good could he have done? How much more could he have accomplished? How many more things could have been done for God and among the people? Humility helps us accomplish more because we're allowing God to be God, because we know our place. Humility allows God to reward us. Remember, he lifts up the humble. If we try to reward ourselves, there's no place left for God to give us a reward. If we try to pat ourselves on the back, the patting's already been done. But if we humble ourselves, it allows God to lift us up and to reward us. But according to what we read, humility allows God to heal us. The passage reads, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, will pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven. I'll forgive their sins and I'll heal their land. Even though that's specifically about something in the Old Testament, the concept is true for us as well. There is power in humility. As oxymoronic as it sounds, there is strength in humility. Being at peace with God sometimes means we've got to go through some things that we don't necessarily want to go through, but that doesn't mean we're not at peace with God. Our goal, what we're striving for, is to be right in the eyes of God. And it is impossible without humility. Maybe there's someone here who's not been baptized for forgiveness of your sins. We'd love to take your Bible in your hand and show you exactly what God promises and expects. Maybe there's someone here who has been baptized, but you've fallen away, and it's going to take a humble act to say, I need help. Look, you got to understand, there is no shame in asking for your brothers and sisters to pray for you. There is no shame in that. There's strength in that. Maybe there is, the correct response is to say, you know what, I'm working on this. I see where I have pride. I see where I have some problems, and I want to humble myself so that God doesn't have to do it for me. Because I guarantee to you, if we don't humble ourselves here, there'll be a day where every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. There will be a day of humbling. It's just going to be a whole lot easier if we've already been doing the humbling along the way. If we can help you in any way, please let us know how as we stand and sing this song.